Another thing that seems to confuse some of the leaders is this differences of efficiency versus effectiveness. Talk a lot about this. Efficiency for me is like this picture here. It's keeping people busy. See, we make the assumption and we borrow from the physical world and we borrow from the complicated world that if we just keep people busy doing something, we will get result. And that works in the physical world. If I've got 2 people digging ditches and I add 2 more people, I'm going to get my ditches dug in roughly half the amount of time. We know that. It's physical in nature. If I have but we need to pay attention to Fred Brooks's law. If you're not familiar with Brooks's law, it's adding people to a late project to only make it later. That's been a law for 50 years, which is, 10 times longer than Apke's law. But Brooks's law is there for a reason, because knowledge workers are different. So it's interesting, I talk about in class, we treat our CPUs, you all know what CPUs are, right? When our CPUs and our computers get above maybe 80% utilization, our computers start to slow down, don't they? Right? Nobody brags and says, hey, I got my computer to 100% utilization. Aren't I doing well? We do that with our people, though. Why do we treat our machines better than we treat our people, for one thing? That drives me crazy. Right? But that's efficiency versus effectiveness. Keeping people busy does not necessarily mean that we're going to get more through the system. Manufacturing people understand this because they will tell you, if you go to a good general manager of a manufacturing facility, they will tell you what the utilization rate is optimal. And it's not 100%, right? It's usually roughly around 80% of anything is an optimal utilization, but we utilize our people well past 100%. What does that do for our work? Well, it keeps everybody busy. That's efficient, but it doesn't allow things to move through the system. So it's not effective. In fact, most of the times efficiency robs effectiveness, right? The other thing that's important is to understand that knowledge work by its very nature is different in the fact that most of the things that we produce through knowledge work are fundamentally different than those things that we produce through manufacturing. The key to manufacturing is to reduce variability, right? To make everything exactly the same. In fact, if I don't make all the parts of my iPhone the same, I will not be able to put together my iPhone. So that metaphor of physical manufacturing is sometimes brought into knowledge work, much to my chagrin, because it doesn't work that way in knowledge work. You cannot control just in manufacturing. If you control the inputs, you'll always get the same output. But we can't use the same thinking in knowledge work, because you cannot just try to control the inputs and assume that you're going to get the same output, because it doesn't work that way in the complex world, and it doesn't work that way in knowledge work. The other thing is that sometimes if we're not careful, we create commodities, right? So if you look at software, the purpose of software is to give somebody a solution that some other software doesn't have. Because if I can give a solution to your problem that some other software doesn't have, I can sell more software. But if I'm just doing what somebody else did, the only way I'm going to beat them is I got to charge less money, right? And so I work here in the Bay Area, and it's pretty expensive. So I don't want to work for a commodity, because commoditization of my product is going to lead me to the poorhouse, right? Because then we're going to go on cost alone. We're not going to go on any perception of difference. So there has to be variability in knowledge work in order to be successful. When we do not have slack, we do not have innovation. So if we're very efficient and everybody's 100% busy, where are you going to find time to innovate? You're not, actually. The least innovative companies are probably the most efficient companies. We shouldn't look for efficiency. We should look for effectiveness. And we should also look for what Russ Ackoff talks about is we need to leapfrog our competition. We can't just copy our competition, which means that we need to have slack. We need to think, right? We need to be able to innovate. And that innovation happens in the slack. Here's something else they don't seem to understand. Theory of constraints. I don't know if you're all familiar with the theory of constraints. You can raise your hand if you are. I can see some of you, right? Theory of constraints comes to us by Ilya Goldratt. He introduced it in a book called The Goal. is another book that I highly recommend. Basically, theory of constraints is a pretty simple thing, but it's very powerful in the sense that even in manufacturing, we have this problem with theory of constraints. If in my class, I show this wonderful animation that I found on the internet. I've got 5 different stations, each of them making different numbers of widgets, and it moves from station to station. In this video that I show, the third station now can only do 10 widgets a day. Guess what the capacity of the entire system is? It's 10 widgets a day. So the capacity of your overall system is constrained by the lowest productivity in the entire system. This happens so much in software development even. And a lot of times I see those constraints, and those constraints are people we call architects. Me and architects don't always get along. Because that's where the work stops. Sometimes it could be legal. You know, I've got all this work, but I can't move it forward because legal's got to do it, but I only got one lawyer and they're 200% busy, right? That's theory of constraints. I am constrained by my resource. Let's say the lawyer is my constraint, I can only move as many things as the lawyer can move through the system. If the lawyer takes a week off, guess what happens to my entire system? It grinds to a halt for the entire week. But we don't manage like that. I was working as a agile coach and scrum master at a place that does healthcare software, and just interesting story. They came to me one day and they said, "We're not moving enough through the system. We're not developing enough software. We need more developers." And I said, hold on there a second. You sure about that? And one of the things we did was we started looking at the flow of the work through the system, and what we found pretty easily, it didn't take long at all. I mean, I think it took like an hour. And the first 45 minutes was just overcoming resistance. It didn't take us long to find out the constraint in the system was QA. It wasn't development. So they could have hired 100 developers. They'd still get the same amount of money. They get the same through. And it didn't make sense to hire them because they're expensive and they're hard to find. So I said, instead of hiring developers, let's hire more QA, or let's get them down off their pedestal and have them do QA. Right? Cross-functional teams. An hour lost at the constraint, a day lost at the constraint means an hour lost the entire system. So if you apply systems thinking to what you're doing, which most software development companies don't do a very good job of, I need to look at the flow of the value through the entire system, and I got to see where it gets stuck. And I can guarantee you that most of them do it and don't do it. And the reason that they don't do it is they don't create cross-functional teams, or they don't look at value as it moves through the system. What they do is they create siloed teams based on technology. I've got my Windows admin, so the Windows admin has to do this. My architect's got to do this. Some other guy's got to do this, or team's got to do this. And some other team's got to do this. Some other team's got to do this. Don't do it that way. Take those 5 teams, take one from each of the team, put them on one team, right? You're going to move the work through the system 5 times faster, because the number of queues that it has to traverse is going to indicate that, you know, if I got 5 queues instead of 1, it's going to take me 5 times as long. It's very simple. Even in Agile, if I have 5 Scrum teams that are working the work, so this is what a lot of Agile teams are doing, which I would say they're not doing optimally. Some of others might say they're doing wrong. I don't like to use the word wrong, but they are taking these siloed teams and they're making them Scrum teams. So one team moves something through in 2 weeks, it goes to the other team, they move it through in 2 weeks, but I've got 5 teams, so it takes me 10 weeks. If I put 1 member on each team, now it only takes me 2 weeks in a 2-week sprint. So this cross-functionality, and I've seen so much more of that lately than I did when I first started doing Agile coaching and Scrum mastering. So understand theory constraints, and the way to do it is to try to move value through the system and see where it gets stuck.